Greetings, fencers. So today we're going to look at my interpretation of the reverser, and why I came to the conclusion that it is like how Meyer describes, and I thought this would be a good example of how to critically read manuscripts, if you're just starting and having troubles and don't have a club to turn to. Now everything I'm saying in this video is not necessarily right, it's just what I think. There are many other views and I'll compare some of them, but I'm not saying they're wrong, just not what I think it is. First we'll look at some historical sources and define some elements a little in a neutral form, then I'll interpret what I think they're referring to. Then I'll explain structurally and technique-wise why I think this is the interpretation, and finally I'll compare some other commonly used interpretations. First we'll look at Codex 44A8, the von Danzig Fechbuch, my primary manuscript. The reverser enforces the running through and also brings wrestling. Take the elbow certainly, spring into his balance. So the reverser is something that will let us enter close range. Note: the reverser is known to fighters as the half-stroke or turn hand, and with it you compel your opponent so that you can run through and fall upon him with the wrestling. Do it like this. So the reverser is known or called as the half-stroke or hand turn. It is probably a reasonably common device to have 2 or 3 names. Here he explains how to thrust, and if they parry, we move in. Come to him in the Zufechten, then go with your left foot forward and strike from your right side with the half-stroke with reversed long edge again and again. Follow your left foot until you come to him, and as soon as you bind on his sword with this, then instantly hang the point in above and thrust at his face. If he parries the thrust and goes high with his arms, then run through against him. The Zufechten is the pre-fight, approaching your opponent just out of distance. Approaching with the left foot forward, he says use the half-stroke, which we now know is the reverser, again and again as we move in. Then he says when we bind on his sword with this. So what is this supposed to mean? Does he mean with the reverser? Well, if we close distance, then instantly hang the point in above. Instantly is indes, so it is likely meaning blade contact. And hanging can mean plow or ox. Above could be hanging upwards with plow, or bring the hands up and hanging with ox. The Dresden manuscript is very different. Note, you shall also execute the play when you bind on his sword with an under or overcut. So invert your sword such that your thumb comes under and thrust him above to the face. So you overwhelm him such that he must parry. It is the same ending but different start and significantly less detail. The Faulkner manuscript says after the failing lines, invert it a little, rush in and wrestle. And it should also be noted that these are in the thwart cut section, but Codex 3227A has it in the crooked cut, but I don't believe it has a gloss interpretation, or I just haven't found one that shows it. And finally, Joachim Meyer, over 100 years later, writes down the reverser in detail. It's essentially a locking of their sword, and you can do any work from it. And he writes in the snapping around section that it's a counter to reversing. I'll bring that up later. So what do I think it means? Well, if we go back to the von Danzig Fechbuch, he says it's a turn hand or half stroke, but he says do it while approaching your opponent. It needs to be small, fast, and safe, and comfortable to do in the Zufechten. And then, after using it, you thrust. I believe this verse is not actually describing the reverser. It's something that everyone knows and has names for, that it's redundant to put in writing. Instead, he jumps straight to saying after using it, you thrust and he'll extreme parry. These verses are not about the reverser, but how to get to grappling. Remember, the word instantly doesn't mean immediately, but the bind. This was also the crooked cut section, and I see the reverser as half that cut and turning the hand. In the Ringach version, the inverter and thrust are separate elements, and it can be done from an Ober- or Unterhalb. How does this hold up structurally? Well, our goal is to get someone hard in the bind so much so that they overparry. The initial reaction to reversing is often to push up and try to retake the center line. They will attempt something else once they know they've failed. Faulkner's Fechbuch says invert it a little. If we start the reversing, they realize what's happening because it's a common thing that's known to fencers. They push up to try to take the center. You wind through plow, then ox as they continue pushing hard with the thrust, coming past the center line with more force than if we wound from the center line. The reverser makes them more prone to that over parry because of the initial hard bind. It can be done from below or a high cut as well. And there's psychological pressure of approaching your opponent while reversing. This gives away what you'll do, so why would you let them know? Because they see what you're trying to do, they're even more likely to start pushing hard if they don't use a technique like Der Wechsel. But if you want to keep it hidden from an advanced fencer, it's better to lead in with a cut or enter the bind. I have found this technique extremely effective against newer fighters. They go hard in the bind even longer. Experienced fencers will use snapping or running off quite quickly while retreating. This leaves your window of opportunity quite small against them, but allows you a chance to trap their sword even if you miss the first options. Now, what are some other ways people have thought about this technique? Well, I see different ways people turn their hand in the cutting approach, but the approach needs to be the reverser itself. Most I've seen show the reverser as the winding thrust, and I see how people assume that, especially from the Ringek manuscript. Maybe it is that simple. It is the hand turn, the thumb placement, and reversed edge, but I'd be pressed to put that word stroke on it, or even half stroke. To me, that's just winding. Now, if you come from an interpretation that only winds with the long edge, I can see that being a reverser, but that would mean all winding like that is a reverser. It's an interesting thing to see so many differences, makes HEMA always new and exciting. Again, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, just what I think. You can let me know if you think it's something very different. I'll definitely be kicking myself later remembering stuff I should have put in this video. Thanks for watching, keep studying, keep practicing.